The horrific murder of Jennifer Johnson rocked Pine Hill, a small but lovely town. A crime of passion and treachery that exposed the sinister underveneers of apparently perfect lives destroyed what seemed to be a quiet, close-knit suburban neighborhood. Two couples, Mark and Jennifer Johnson and Daniel and Linda Garner, weaved their lives in ways that would cause obsession, dishonesty, and finally murder. Respected architect Daniel Garner was recognized for his friendliness and apparently flawless marriage to committed schoolteacher Linda. The closest friends of the Garners were successful financial advisor Mark Johnson and his wife Jennifer. The two couples shared more than simply weekend trips and neighborhood barbecues. They also participated in a voluntary wife-swapping arrangement that first gave their life freshness and zest. Underneath this unusual way of existence, though, dangerous feelings were building. Linda, Daniel's wife, was painfully aware of as his fixation with Jennifer developed into all-consuming one. Sensing the depth of Daniel's emotions, Jennifer chose to call off the arrangement without understanding the lethal results her choice would set off. Having been married for 10 years, Daniel and Linda Garner's marriage from the outside seemed to be an example of stability and contentment. Daniel was a successful architect distinguished by his creative ideas and friendly demeanor. Third graders loved Linda, a teacher, and her colleagues valued her. Surrounded by a well-kept garden Linda took great delight in. They lived in a little house on Maple Street. 5 years ago, Mark and Jennifer Johnson relocated to Pine Hill, and they soon befriended the Garners. Usually the life of the party, Mark, a financial counselor, was gregarious and friendly. Jennifer was equally well-liked for her remarkable beauty and compelling appeal. The Johnsons' presence gave the area fresh vitality, and their friendship with the Garners developed around common interests and mutual respect. First discussed over a dinner party at the Garners' house was wife-swapping. Driven by alcohol and an adventurous spirit, the discussion moved to open relationships. To everyone's astonishment, the idea was greeted with more inquiry than shock. The concept was taken more seriously over the next few weeks. Everyone agreed to guidelines and limits to guarantee their core relationships stayed intact. Though uncomfortable, the initial meeting was fascinating. For the evening, Daniel and Jennifer traded partners with Mark and Linda. Though it was an exciting but terrifying experience, it left them wanting more. What began as a once-in-a-lifetime experiment quickly became a daily habit that gave both couples life's spark. At first, the configuration looked to be good. Both couples seemed to be more linked and joyful. They kept up their social events, usually planning vacations together and holding joint parties. Their secret was tightly guarded and shared just within their houses or at private meetings. The arrangement was innovative and made one excited. For a period, it seemed as though they had discovered the ideal equilibrium. But as the months went by, especially in Daniel's behavior, minute changes started to show up. Often finding reasons to spend time alone with Jennifer, he began to demonstrate an odd degree of interest in her. Though Linda opted to overlook his growing obsession, thinking it was only a phase. Mark too looked blind to the mounting stress. Unknown to the others, Daniel's obsession with Jennifer was becoming something darker and more dangerous. He found himself thinking about her non-stop, mentally recreating their meetings and yearning more time with her. Originally a pleasant adventure, what had begun as such was gradually turning into an obsession with terrible effects for everybody engaged. Daniel's obsession with Jennifer was no more only excitement. It had become a consuming addiction. He considered her constantly, his thoughts straying to their meetings at family dinners and business conferences. Originally his passion, his architectural endeavors now looked secondary to his need for Jennifer. He began looking for ways to be close to her, offering to assist with chores Mark typically took care of or bringing the Johnsons around more often. Linda started to see her spouse changing. She first connected it to the thrill of their new way of life, but soon she realized Daniel's interest in Jennifer beyond their agreement. When they were away from the Johnsons, he was agitated and detached. His talks frequently turned toward Jennifer's loves and dislikes, her eccentricities and habits. One evening Linda confronted Daniel while tidying following a dinner gathering. Defensive in nature, he discounted her worries as jealousy. Not wishing to upset the careful equilibrium they had created, Linda let it go but watched him closely. Her misgivings intensified when she discovered him fixated on Jennifer at events, his eyes lingering longer than advised. Jennifer too started to see Daniel's mounting fixation. She first felt flattered by his attention, then found it awkward. His comments grew more intimate than suitable, his touches more possessive. She told Mark she was uncomfortable, but he dismissed her, believing Daniel was just more demonstrative in his love. Mark's indifference left Jennifer feeling alone in her worries. The turning moment occurred on a weekend visit to a lakefront cottage. The couples had scheduled the vacation to allow time away from their daily grind and to reconnect. Still, the vacation just helped to accentuate Daniel's obsession. Insisting on taking Jennifer out on the lake alone, he monopolized her time and left Mark and Linda behind. The tension was evident, and Daniel gently opposed Jennifer's attempts to separate herself. Daniel crossed the line one evening as seated by the fire. Just the two of them, he talked of leaving everything behind and beginning over. Startled and uncomfortable, Jennifer hurried out and went to bed early. Having overheard the chat, Linda challenged Daniel once more. This time he was less contemptuous, but still denied the depth of his emotions. As Linda came to understand Daniel's degree of preoccupation, her irritation mounted. Though she loved her husband, she knew his obsession with Jennifer would ruin their marriage and their friendship with the Johnsons. Though she tried to step in, Daniel's actions simply got more chaotic. Under the cover of casual visits, he began to show up at Jennifer's yoga sessions, follow her outside of their scheduled meetings, and even show up at her office. Jennifer's uneasiness evolved into dread. She told a close friend, who suggested she keep her distance from Daniel as much as she could. Driven to take charge, Jennifer resolved to completely abandon the plan. By doing this, she hoped Daniel would come to his senses, and they could all move on from this chapter free from more damage. One evening, Daniel dropped by the Johnsons' house unannounced while Mark was on a business trip. Though surprised, Jennifer let him in, trying to avert a scene. Sitting in the living room, the air dense with unsaid tension, Daniel said he loved her. Speaking about a time when they might be together freely, Jennifer, appalled, tried to reason with him, telling him their arrangement was never meant to be more than a fleeting thrill. Jennifer's apprehension changed to rage as Daniel's declarations grew more forceful. She saw she had to stop this before it wrecked her connection with Linda and her marriage. She told Daniel squarely that their arrangement was finished and that he should honor her marriage and limits. Clearly disturbed, Daniel tried to talk Jennifer back from her decision. Jennifer avoided Daniel for the next 3 days, thinking he would come to sense. She told Linda, who listened with heavy heart. Knowing her obsession had gone too far, Linda felt a perverse allegiance to Daniel even as she wished to help Jennifer. With an eye toward diffusing the matter, she assured Jennifer she would speak with him. But Daniel's fixation grew stronger. Starting to show up at Jennifer's office, he waited for her after hours and left her notes declaring his pure love. Feeling more and more threatened, Jennifer chose to face him one last time in an attempt to get him to see the seriousness of his behavior. They got together in a remote area far from curious onlookers. Jennifer said again that their agreement was finished and that his behavior was unacceptable. She urged him to let go and forward. Unable to swallow her rejection, Daniel became desperate. She was accused of guiding him on and experimenting with his feelings. Calm under pressure, Jennifer urged they split ways and go back to their separate marriages. They had no idea Linda had followed Daniel to the park. Her heart beating, she watched from a distance as the conflict developed. She could see Jennifer's will and the suffering on Daniel's face. Linda dreaded what might come next, even though she knew this encounter was unavoidable. Daniel's desperation changed to rage as the debate heated up. Jennifer seemed to be betraying him personally by refusing to indulge his dreams. He verbally attacked her, calling her names and charging her with destroying his life. Holding back tears, Jennifer stood her ground, not frightened. Watching from the shadows, Linda experienced a panic attack. She realized she had to step in before things spiraled out of control. Her voice quivering, she emerged from her hiding place and went toward the two to yell at Daniel. Linda appeared to snap Daniel out of his fury, and he turned to her, his face a mix of uncertainty and relief. Using the diversion, Jennifer left, resolved to keep as much distance between herself and Daniel as might be. Now just with her husband, Linda sought to cool him off. She told him they will get past this, but inward she knew their lives had been irreparably altered. The affair had gotten to its breaking point, and Jennifer's choice to call off the arrangement started a series of events she couldn't erase. The real scope of Daniel's fixation and the depths of Linda's cooperation would eventually become clear as the dust settled, so guiding a sad and terrible ending. Daniel had been in turmoil since the altercation at the park. Jennifer's strong rejection and Linda's surprising visit had rocked him to his very core. That evening he went back home, his head whirling with resentment, guilt, and hopelessness. Sensing the tempest building inside him, Linda tried to calm his disturbed thoughts, but Daniel stayed inconsolable. Daniel's behavior grew ever more irregular over the following few days. He stammered between periods of great wrath and profound hopelessness. He quit showing up for work, spending his days fixated on Jennifer's rejection and the supposed injustices he had endured. Unable to contact him, Linda's own anxiety and frustration developed. She knew something had to give, but she was not ready for the sharp turn of events that would shortly transpire. Jennifer, however, was resolved to keep ahead. Focusing on her work and her friendship with Mark, she avoided all interaction with Daniel. Fearing her husband's response and the possible consequences, she had not told him the whole degree of Daniel's fixation. Cutting ties will perhaps let Daniel come to terms with the termination of their relationship and leave her alone. Jennifer got home from work one evening to discover Daniel waiting for her outside her house. Her heart dropped at seeing him, and she prepared herself for yet another encounter. She gently went up to him and told him to go, her voice steady but stern. Desperate, Daniel begged her for one final chance to explain himself. His eyes were wild. Sensing the futility of the talk, Jennifer tried to pass him, but Daniel grabbed her arm. Jennifer could see the craziness in his eyes from his tight and agonizing hold. Her voice rising as she begged he let go, she battled to break free. One neighbor noticed the noise and went outside to investigate what was occurring. Daniel let Jennifer go after spotting his neighbor. Shaken and terrified, Jennifer thanked her neighbor and dashed inside. Hoping to find a way to define the matter without involving the police, she phoned Linda. Hearing Jennifer's voice convey anxiety, Linda agreed to see her the following day to go over how to handle Daniel's progressively erratic conduct. Linda ran across Jennifer at a neighborhood cafe the following day. Tired and stressed, Jennifer described her meeting with Daniel and her developing concern for her safety. Linda listened carefully, while her mind ran wild trying to create a strategy. She assured Jennifer she would speak with Daniel and help him to realize their relationship was finished. Linda came home from the conference to discover Daniel agitated. She called Jennifer about the event, her voice a mix of concern and wrath. Feeling cornered, Daniel attacked her, accusing her of supporting Jennifer's side and turning on him. The dispute grew more intense, and Linda withdrew to their bedroom fearful for her own safety. That evening Daniel's ideas grew more sinister. He couldn't believe Jennifer turned him down and that his own wife opposed him. In his warped head, he thought that removing the cause of his suffering was the only way to fix things. If he couldn't have Jennifer, he reasoned, nobody else could. Daniel headed for the Johnsons' residence on a cool, clear night. Knowing Mark left Jennifer alone out of town, he knew he broke in through a side window and headed for Jennifer's bedroom, asleep. He became enraged and desperate seeing her calm and ignorant. With his head confused with a wild mix of love and hate, he reached for a kitchen knife and walked over to her. When Jennifer woke up, Daniel stood over her and the knife shined in the low light. She tried to scream, but Daniel covered her mouth, his hold firm and relentless. Furious, he dropped the knife into her chest to quiet her screaming. Daniel stared over Jennifer as her life vanished. His mind was a fog of contradictory feelings. Following the murder, Daniel left the scene holding Jennifer's blood-drenched hand. When he got home, Linda discovered him shaking and incoherent. She knew right away what he had done, and in a flash of conflicted allegiance, she chose to assist him in hiding the murder. Their created existence, the secrets they guarded, were all online. Linda understood they had to move fast and forcefully if they were to live. Driven by a distorted sense of self-preservation and loyalty, Linda grabbed hold of things fast. She guided Daniel to the bathroom, telling him to strip and wash off his blood. Her brain ran with the urgency of their situation. She understood they had to move quickly to hide the crime and save their secret life. Linda took Daniel's clothes and put them in a plastic bag while he stood under the hot shower. The water was pink around his feet. She cleaned the floor he had walked on, trying to eradicate any evidence of blood. She took Daniel down and made him tell every detail of what had transpired once he was cleaned up. Though in emotional state, Daniel was able to give a cogent narrative. His voice trembles with the weight of his deeds. Linda formulated a strategy. They had to build an alibi and get rid of any proof tying them to the crime. Claiming that Daniel had been with her all evening and so supporting their alibi, she phoned a close friend. She then drove to a remote location outside of town where she torched Daniel's murder weapon and blood-stained clothing, hoping the fire would swallow any last traces. Every neighbor, including the Garners, was asked questions by the police. Under examination, Linda's well-constructed alibi proved to be strong. Daniel, clearly upset, avoided drawing attention. With no clear direction pointing to the Garners, the inquiry appeared to stagnate. Though at first successful in avoiding the authorities, Daniel and Linda suffered psychologically from the murder. Daniel was more and more apprehensive, thinking he was under police surveillance. He distanced himself in a web of guilt and anxiety from friends and colleagues. Linda felt the weight of their secret crushing down on her, even if she was apparently calm. She grew hypervigilant, examining every exchange and behavior for indicators of mistrust from everyone around her. For the Garners, the weeks Jennifer's murder followed were a haze of conflict and dishonesty. Linda assumed the position of the stabilizer, controlling Daniel's anxiety and keeping their public front unbroken. Relieved that the police seemed to have no strong leads, she watched the news for any updates on the inquiry. Linda realized, though, that keeping their cover needed more than simply an alibi. They had to craft a story meant to deflect focus from Daniel. To fit the community's mourning, she advised Daniel to show more sadness over Jennifer's loss, therefore dispelling any mistrust. Daniel served as the bereaved buddy at neighborhood meetings and social events. His eyes often welling with tears, he spoke of Jennifer with a mix of affection and sadness. Devastated and seeking explanations, Mark seemed to value Daniel's sensitivity. Never suspect of his friend's role in his wife's death, Daniel's mental condition worsened, and his remorse showed up as hallucinations and nightmares. He began binge drinking, turned to alcohol for comfort, but only found momentary escape. Fearing he would confess in a drunken stupor, Linda kept a watchful check on him, often staying up late to make sure he stayed in the house. Daniel broke down one evening hunched over a whiskey glass. He had to come clean. He told Linda he could not live with the guilt anymore. Panic-stricken Linda sought to cool him down so they would keep their composure. Linda advised they travel a little distance outside of town. Hoping the change of landscape might help Daniel find some sort of serenity, they arrived at a remote mountain home. The solitude offered a little break from the pressure of the research hovering over them, so they might arrange their next moves. Linda stressed the need of their confidentiality throughout their stay at the cottage. Drilling Daniel until he could reply without thinking, she guided him on how to manage public contacts and police interrogation. Linda's continuous drive to keep their tail clear was motivated by her will to preserve their way of life and escape jail. When the Garners got back to Pine Hill, they started their life with fresh direction. Still troubled by his behavior, Daniel put up a more consistent front. Linda kept control over their contacts with the neighborhood, so they stayed above suspicion. But the fissures in their front were starting to emerge. Friends and neighbors observed Daniel's rising drinking and erratic conduct, and rumors of his suspected role in Jennifer's death started to fly around. Ever alert, Linda battled the whispers, but she realized her time was running out. New evidence surfaced as the cops' probe went on, suggesting discrepancies in Daniel's alimony. The truth was closer than ever before, and the finely crafted world of the Garners was on verge of collapse. Separately interviewing the Garners, Detective Mitchell noted any differences in their accounts. Under examination, Linda's well-constructed alibi stood up, and Daniel's emotional state seemed fitting for a buddy in grief. Mitchell's gut, nevertheless, sensed more to the narrative. As the weeks went by, fresh data surfaced. Jennifer's phone records were forensically examined and turned up a sequence of progressively desperate text messages from Daniel, suggesting his fixation with her. Mitchell invited Daniel in to probe his alibi's contradictions and the extent of his relationship with Jennifer. Struggling to keep his cool, Daniel stayed to the tale Linda had schooled him on, but his uneasiness and evasive responses only heightened the detective's misgivings. The turning point arrived when a neighbor stepped forward carrying vital information. On the evening of the murder, they had noticed Daniel's automobile parked close to the Johnsons' house and recalled his unusual actions. The police had enough proof, this testimony, the forensic evidence, and Daniel's erratic behavior, to get a search warrant for the Garners' house. Despite Linda's exhaustive cleaning, the police discovered traces of blood that had seeped into the floors and fragments of burned clothing during the search. Together with phone records and witness testimony, this overwhelming proof of Daniel's culpability presented a clear image. The net was closing in on the Garners, and Linda knew their well-built front was going to fall apart. She understood that their only chance of avoiding a long prison sentence was to devise a fresh strategy whereby the guilt would be shifted from them to someone else. Linda and Daniel confronted the brutal reality of their circumstances as the cops closed in. The truth was about to be exposed in a way they could never have predicted. The falsehoods and dishonesty that had once shielded them were now threatening to totally collapse. Detective Mitchell ready to move as the proof against Daniel became accumulated. She brought Daniel in for still another round of interrogation, using a different strategy this time. She arranged all the data they had collected, the forensic results, the phone records, the witness testimony. Overwhelmed and cornered, Daniel started to break under the strain. Mitchell pressed harder, implying that should Daniel come clean, he might be sentenced more leniali. Daniel fell down at last, unable to bear the weight of his guilt and the constant interrogation. Declared to have killed Jennifer, he detailed his infatuation, the encounter, and the instant he lost control. But in his confession, Daniel also linked Linda to hiding the crime. He detailed how she had helped him create an alibi, tidy up, and dispose of proof. Sensing the chance to learn the whole truth, Mitchell had Linda brought in for interrogation as well. When Daniel confessed, Linda first claimed no participation. But Linda knew there was nowhere out when Mitchell went over the facts in Daniel's story. Her well-crafted falsehoods had at last come apart. She said she had helped Daniel because of a misplaced feeling of loyalty and a fear of losing all they had created. Pine Hill and the surrounds were enthralled with Daniel and Linda Garner's trial. Curious bystanders and reporters abound in the courtroom, ready to witness the end of the sad story. Charged with first-degree murder, Daniel, Linda, charged with accessory to murder and obstruction of justice, both admitted their respective crimes. Daniel received a life in prison sentence devoid of parole option. Linda's cooperation with the inquiry and her spotless record helped her to get a smaller sentence, even though she participated in the cover-up. She received a 15-year prison sentence. After 10, she might be granted release. Though he still grieved the loss of his loving wife, Mark Johnson, left to gather the fragments of his broken life, took some comfort in the justice done.